So here we are on the first Sunday after New Year's. I love watching that ball drop. Kind of reminds me of what I've been doing all year. A year ago, I made a New Year's resolution to lose 10 pounds, and I'm doing pretty well. I only have 20 to go. Now, some of the traditions hold that at the moment that one year stops and the next year begins, there's a crack in time. There's a brief interruption in time, and we have an opening to the no time, to the place beyond the calendar and the clock. And there are creatures that live there, not unlike the wild things in our story. They are the ancients and they are the fairies, and some have no name at all. And during that crack in time, they can enter our world, and so there is chaos. One important ritual is to make a lot of very loud noise to scare them away, and that is the tradition of noisemakers on New Year's Eve. Now, this is an old story that shows up in many parts of the planet, perhaps to help us come to terms with the mystery of time, with the passing of time and the change that comes with it. And part of that opening is similar to the stories of the travelers that go off into the land of the fairies. Maybe they climb through the roots of a tree or somehow get to that other place, which is slightly related to the land of the dead. And they go there and have long adventures and come back and no time has passed or just a few moments. And then there are other stories where a traveler will wander off just for a brief time and go dancing in the moonlight with the fairies and come back and 100 years have passed. So there's a difference between our time and their time, making us aware of the strangeness of times. And there was a great interest in fairies, a serious interest around 1900s, 1910. In 1917, some people claimed to have taken some photographs. They were probably fake, but the great author Arthur Conan Doyle took an interest in the pictures. You can find them on the web. They're sort of strange looking. I've tried this, but mine never come out. They're always kind of pixelated. The quality, pixelated, anyway, the quality isn't very good. You had to be there. There is the possibility that all these stories of pixies and elves and fairies are parts of some old religion, old stories that have lingered past the ceremonies that we are familiar with. And perhaps they are ways that we came up with, humans came up with, to deal with time, to deal with loss, to deal with our own mortality, the big questions. And so that's why I chose this topic for this day. In some of the traditions, the ancestors can worship, all those that have gone before. Now, the break of the new year is not always at the same time of day. It varies from culture to culture. But of course, the ancestors are always with us. We are very aware of the past. I'm a therapist, so of course I work on issues. The psychoanalyst joke is, you know, if it's not one thing, it's your mother. That is, we are, if you will, involved in a form of ancestor worship. We're working out where we came from, our own creation myth, our origin story. In the American Civil War, there was an enormous interest in spiritualism. It probably came up because of all the carnage and people trying to cope with the losses. But there were seances. Mary Todd Lincoln had seances in the White House because she had lost her beloved son. Willie Lincoln died, and he was particularly close to their hearts. Abraham Lincoln in the deep night would go over to the mausoleum and get the caretaker to open it up and go in there and sit with his lost son and pick his body up and weep. There's a recent novel, a wonderful literary novel called Lincoln in the Bardo. That Bardo, the term from Buddhism about the intermediate place between lives where we go. And in this wonderful novelization of this real historical event, Lincoln goes so often to the graveyard, to the mausoleum, that those souls still waiting to go on, still hanging near their bodies in the graveyard, got to know Lincoln, and this whole story opens up. But what I'm hearing from a psychological point of view is how extreme emotion takes us into altered states, that we will learn things about life at times of loss that are so hard, but so important. We are changed that we are broken but healed by the terrible things that happen. Interest in spiritualism rose again during the other pandemic, the Spanish influenza at the time of World War I. Again, terrible losses. I'm choking up just talking about it. And we have now strong emotions related to this pandemic that we're going through. And it is breaking us, and we are learning things. It is a terrible, hard time, but we will be changed. Now, as a therapist, strong emotion and coming to terms with it is a central theme. Max in the story has his anger, and it takes him to another place, and he comes to terms with it. But the adventure comes out of the fact that he had a kind of uncontrollable emotion. So I'll tell a story from my clinical work. A few years back, a patient I worked with for a while came in looking kind of sheepish. I'll call him Ed for our story here. And he'd been working on grief since his wife, Julie, had died suddenly about 6 months before. It was a brain aneurysm. There was no sign of it. It just came the way sudden things can. And after an awkward silence, Ed said what was on his mind. Julie came to see me the other day. Now, we both knew that Julie has been gone for 6 months at this point. And he goes on, I was sitting in the kitchen having my morning coffee. The window by the table was open. She walked up in the garden and talked to me through the screen. Now, this guy, Ed, is a tax lawyer, not a metaphysical type at all. Julie, his wife, his late wife, was a botanist, not somebody who believed in ghosts. I knew her from some couple sessions we'd had the previous year. Ed goes on, she came by to apologize for being reckless with her health. We talked about the kids and how they were handling it. So I'm a therapist. What am I going to say about this thing? I can't make any sense out of it, but it's not a time to challenge facts. I just asked him how he felt about the visit. It was very comforting, he said. It was like that window screen was the veil. Julie seemed to know she was dead. She also knew neither one of us believed in an afterlife or ghostly visitations. Nothing was said in the conversation about that, about the strangeness of it. It just seemed like she had some unfinished business, like she needed to say goodbye. We talked for about a half an hour and then she wanted to go. And the last thing we each said to each other was, I love you. That was it. It was clear she wasn't going to come by again. I don't know what to make of the whole thing, but it really helps. Neither Ed nor I could find any framework of ideas to explain this visit. We both think it was a good thing, but have no idea where to file it. I guess some ghost stories are better than others. Now, therapy is not exactly research. The highest value isn't accuracy, it's healing. So I'm not going to challenge the fact. I would give Ed the same respect I would give a client who came from another religious background. It's in keeping with our UU values to be respectful. So I am, but I got curious after that session and started reading about these visitations, and there are a lot of them. And mostly families kind of dismiss them. So if you have one, be real selective on who you tell about it, because people will put it down. I think people put it down because it kind of scares them, or they're worried somebody's going crazy. And the evidence we have is this is not mental illness. These are steady people. A lot of children will see these, and then there'll be some problems with the parents dismissing this fantasy life. But many adults have them as well. So I started asking other people, other clients, but also friends and family who had lost somebody, if they've seen them. I ask it real casually. Sometimes I'll introduce it and say, well, I've been reading about this and a lot of people see, and I have had a surprising number of yeses. People usually starting out very hesitantly, like wondering if I'm going to judge them, if I'm going to think they're crazy or something. And I seem to be safe, and they'll go ahead and tell them and tell me, and they'll tell their story. And then they'll say, I haven't told anybody about this. So this was just a while before my father died. And about a year after he died, I asked my mother, have you seen Daddy? She said, long pause. She said, yes. Yeah, he came by. Um, just like it was a normal thing to do. He sat right where you're sitting. And we were at the table and I was sitting in the chair. He always had it. You know how people in families have a place. I was in Daddy's chair. He sat right there. And we didn't talk about what had happened since or anything. He wanted to know about the children. He apologized for leaving. It was a stroke. It was a sudden thing. There was no expectations. It was as strong as an ox and then gone, just like that. And that's a sign, as I read about these things, they're often people that have something unfinished. They need to say goodbye. They left suddenly and they come to help. And it does help. It helps people deal with this. And they don't have to have a belief system for it. And they don't have to make any sense out of it. It just is some kind of comfort. And there are many stories about how the departed are still around us. I saw a production at the Downtown Unitarian of Spoon River Anthology. Edgar, what's his name again? Masters. Tom Bohm was in it. Tom Bohm was one of the guys that stood up behind the gravestone and told a bit of his story. And it's a charming and very moving play to see because it reminds us of how the departed really are still with us. And there are many of these stories. Under Milkwood by Dylan Thomas is about a little town in Wales and they're the living and the dead. There's one woman who has the company, pretty much constant company of not one, but two departed husbands who are in ongoing conversations with her and with each other. In the Milagro Beanfield War, various former members of the community walk around town every day. And it's like nothing. All those strangers or visitors to the town think it's a little odd that some of these people are alive and some of them haven't been alive for some while. Oh, I have a joke about the ghost professor. He says, oh, look at the board while I walk. I'm sorry, I'm messing up my own joke here. The ghost professor says, look at the board while I go through this again. Okay. So there are all these stories. And why? Why do we have all these fairy stories? Why do we have uncanny mysteries? Why do we watch these documentaries? I mean, I'm in some of these programs and we comment on these. People are drawn to the unexplained. And the scientific perspective is that you resist the temptation to entirely write off something if it cannot be disproved. So we leave a little room. We still realize that the preponderance of evidence is against this kind of thing. And yet we have reports, lots of reports. It must mean something to us. It helps us deal with unbearable grief. There's an old saying in Britain where they talk about where a child is that has gone, and they say, oh, he's gone away with the fairies. Even the story of Peter Pan was about lost boys, as in lost boys, not just lost souls, but not with us anymore. And these are long fantasy stories about, well, maybe they've gone to some good place. Maybe they're having a good life. And there are other cultures. In the dream time in Aboriginal culture, Ann and I went down and talked to some of the elders, and we talked about how the ancestors stay with us. They come in the dreams on a daily basis. They stay around. Faulkner said, the past is never dead. It's not even past. Some of my favorite ghost stories are movies where we slowly realize we're following an unreliable narrator and that the character that we're identifying with is actually the ghost. I don't mind dying. I just don't want to be there when it happens. It's an old Woody Allen line. And of course, it's not true at all. I mean, of course, we all mind dying. I do enjoy stories that are told from the perspective of the departed. In Carousel, the wonderful musical, Billy Bigelow comes back, gets a chance to try to redeem himself. In Thornton Wilder's poignant play, Our Town, set in Grover's Corner, New Hampshire, in Our Town, Emily Webb stops. She's at the threshold of the afterlife, and she uses her one and only chance to go back. She's allowed. The people that have departed say, don't do this. It won't be good. But she wants to go back. She wants to see one more time. She decides to revisit her 12th birthday. The stage manager, who is a kind of Chiron figure, the ferryman in the Egyptian mythology, the one who guides you to the other world, he's reluctant, but she has this right, apparently, by the rules of the play. In our town, you're allowed to go back. And so he lets her, he warns her, they won't know it's the grown Emily. It'll be her 12th birthday. They'll just see her as 12 years old, but she wants to go. And they can only see her as a young person and can't hear most of what she says, because anything that's out of the context of her 12th birthday, they won't actually be able to hear. But she gets some comfort from small details, like the white picket fence in front of her family home, her childhood home, which she hasn't seen for years. Apparently the fence has been gone for some while. She said, I forgot how much I love that. And her parents' faces, because they're much younger, and how good they look. She tries to tell her mother to really look at her, to stop, because the mother's all busy making breakfast, but the mother can't hear those words. And finally, this all starts getting to Emily. Maybe those people who warned her not to go back were right. She starts sobbing. I can't go on. It goes so fast. We don't have time to look at one another. I didn't realize all that was going on, and we never noticed. She's ready to leave, and it's a lot sooner than she thought. Goodbye, she says. Goodbye, Grover's Corners, Mama and Papa. Goodbye to clocks ticking and Mama's sunflowers and food and coffee and new iron dresses and hot baths and sleeping and waking up. Oh, Earth, you're too wonderful for anybody to realize you. Emily looks toward the stage manager and asks him abruptly through her tears, do any human beings ever realize life while they live it every minute? And he says, no, the saints and poets, maybe they do, some. It's a memorable play. There's a great line in another play that death ends a life, but it does not end a relationship. And that's my point today. We're in relationship to everyone who has loved us, everyone who has been important to us. And I think we get to go on keeping that love. We get to go on keeping that meaning, that closeness. They are still around, and not just in the season of New Year's. Now, I'm not saying that I'm a believer in all of this. I comment on it on television, but I'm interested in it, but I don't know. It doesn't really fit in with my worldview, and yet there it is. It does sort of fascinate me. Existential philosophers tell us that the proximity of death stirs us to get busy and create meaning. They call it the vitality of death. They say it's actually a good thing. It's part of what makes us develop philosophy and create art and get on with things and enjoy and savor. So I'm saying that the pandemic is making us reflective. We are living with death more than usual. Let us make beauty of this time. Let us serve love.